Representative Smith,
Here.
Chairman Bear.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Very well, thank you. And since the speaker just walked in the door, we'll have you come forward and have a seat. Welcome to Appropriations, Mr. Speaker. And just for everybody in the room, we're going to quickly knock out our last re-referral of House bills, and then we will get on to Senate File Number 1. So if you could give us about a 2-minute, 30,000-foot view of House Bill 249, Mr. Speaker, we'd sure appreciate it, and then we'll get on with looking at the appropriation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What it boils down to a good
Yes, afternoon, well into
ladies and gentlemen.
Well into
So,
it, actually, sir.
get a little hairy downstairs. Anyway, what this basically is this the dollars that are going to be necessary to replace any funds that would be expended by the county clerks in the event that there would be any runoff elections. So this is simply money that will be held in reserve in the Secretary of State's, only to be used as a reimbursement for any runoff elections that would happen to take place. That's basically what it is. It's just making sure that our clerks are whole. They don't have any out-of-pocket on this other than just refunding their expenses. So,
And Mr. Speaker, this would be held at the Secretary of State's office for dissemination should there be a runoff election.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
Questions for the bringer? Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for being with us today. Do we have an estimate about what a runoff election cost per county?
Mr. Speaker.
Thank you.
It is going to be determined. It'll be basically would be similar to what our current costs are on our primaries. Granted that these elections are going to be set up on only the top 5 elected as any of our national legislative positions. And so this is not going to be legislative as far as House or Senate. These will only come into play as if we have in our top 5 or our 3 nationally elected positions. And so actually the numbers dollars wise, I don't have those specifically. The clerks I think would be able to speak to that more closely. What we try to do is to be able to provide enough funding held in reserve that in case the event of every one of our 23 counties would have a runoff, that's what's there to make sure that we covered everybody. And that was a number that we came up with through determination with the Clerks Association. I left that to LSO. I said, just make sure that these folks are not going to be stuck with anything like that and make sure that they're whole if they do indeed have any of these elections. In a worst case scenario, that all of them will be able to be made whole. And so,
Thank you.
So, Mr. Speaker, although this only applies to statewide elections, if there were a runoff, it would be done by county if there were a criteria met for, well, actually, if you have three people in a race or more, it would be a statewide. So these funds would definitely go to all 23 counties. Am I correct?
if there is an election that is required in runoff in the primary. So the only way that this is if that elector did not make it on to, shall we say, if they didn't get 50% plus one of the votes, then they would automatically advance. And so, yes, it would be, in effect, yes, sir.
Any further questions? I'll just make a quick comment. I do recall that the last time this bill was presented, the estimate was a little over $1 million for statewide. So this appropriation would definitely cover one of those. So, okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead,
if I may
Mr.
add,
Speaker.
I would prefer just to allow the clerks to be able to clear that up for us. I would hate to try to say what that will or won't cost them. I'm sure they have some current costs on what that would be, and I would just be glad to allow them to be able to opine on that. So make sure that my only consideration, ladies and gentlemen, in the bill was to make sure that our clerks and our counties were covered in the event that this would take place. And so,
I don't believe we have any clerks here to testify this time. So is there anybody in the audience who would like to testify on House Bill 249? Okay, any further questions for the bringer? All right, we'll go ahead and close public comment. Committee, what's your pleasure? Okay, move the bill, moved by Smith, seconded by Allemand. All right, we'll begin working through the bill. Page 1, page 2,
thank you, committee.
page 3, page 4, page 5. Mr. Speaker, thank you for bringing us a very long bill. Page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, page 10, page 11, page 12, page 13, page 14, page 15. Go ahead, Representative Sherwood.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if this will save us some time, but I think based on our rules for re-referral, we can only really discuss and impact the appropriation and the enactment date. So I think we could just skip all the way to pages 41 and 42.
I think you are absolutely right, Representative Sherwood, so without objection, we will do that. Page 41, page 42, and the appropriation is $2 million, as the bringer of the bill explained. Any comments on the bill? Seeing none, Ms. Childress, would you please take the roll?
Roll call vote on House Bill 249 do pass. Representative Alaman?
Aye.
Representative Angelos? Aye. Representative Harrelson?
Aye.
Representative Pendergraft?
Aye.
Representative Sherwood?
Aye.
Representative Smith?
Aye.
Chairman Bear?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, 7 aye.
Thank you, Ms. Childress. And with that, I just want to take a moment and brag on the House Appropriations team, which just finished 39 House bills on referral, 14 on re-referral as of that one. And we are heads and shoulders above all the other House committees, and just want to appreciate all your hard work, meeting every day and helping the body get a chance to debate these bills. Much hard work on your part, and it's much appreciated, as well as your work on House Bill 1, which was exemplary. Thank you very much. And with that, we will get into Senate File 1. And let's see who we've got coming forward for a team here. All right. I think we have a summary in here in your packets, folks. Mr. Richards, thank you for being here today and presenting the summary and/or the work that the Senate completed on Senate File 1. If you'd like to begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Don Richards, Budget and Fiscal Administrator for the Legislative Service Office. First of all, I would like to direct your attention to 5 separate handouts that should be in a packet on your desks. These may not be in the same order as you're opening them up, but I will start by a brief discussion of what we refer to as the high-level summary. That is the positions between the two houses. Yes, one pager. The second inclusion also appears on your desks on the floor, I imagine, and that is today's copy of the LSO fiscal profile, commonly referred to as the goldenrod. The third item is actually a copy of the formal report that this committee will submit to the floor. And upon the conclusion of today's meeting, we will get a signature from the chairman if it is your pleasure to move this report to the floor. I understand in terms of process, today is the last day for Committee of the Whole, so it's likely this committee report will be heard by the House tomorrow. The fourth item in your packet is a summary, or not a summary, it's the actual text of all of the Senate amendments. And then finally, and lastly, you should have a tabloid-sized version of a summary of all the Senate amendments. Just for a bit of a refresher, what we're doing here today in terms of process, the rules, Rule 14 requires you to review the Senate amendments and then report on those to your colleagues. So at some point in the next couple of days, you and your team collectively will report on each of these amendments to your colleagues and answer some questions. So feel free to ask Catherine and I questions about if you don't understand any of the amendments. There is a provision in the rule, which has not been used in the last 2 decades, for the floors to run a straw poll on each of the amendments. They have dispensed with that straw poll in the past couple of decades, but the option for any member on the floor to do so still occurs in your rule. Today, Catherine Camerati will be presenting to you on the details of the Senate amendments. As I staffed the House during your House Bill 1 markup, she staffed the Senate during Senate File 1's markup. At the conclusion of your presentation on the floor in the next couple of days, typically, in the last couple of years, the committee or the House has just received the report. They really don't vote on it one way or the other because they're just receiving that report. Anytime after you present the report, the Speaker can appoint the 5 members of the Joint Conference Committee on Senate File 1 and House Bill 1. In terms of the Senate's calendar, they will be meeting in a similar environment tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. to discuss just your amendments on House Bill 1. Once all of that is completed and the 5 members from each side are appointed, we will have a separate sheet with both amendments combined into one product for the JCC members and any legislator who wants to follow along with that. So today's presentation on just the Senate amendments obviously does not include the action that you took last week. Returning to the high-level summary, I'll just walk through a few key facts. The Senate adopted 28 amendments compared to your House position of 19 amendments. So the Senate side adopted 9 more amendments than you did. You also adopted 5 mirror amendments. Those mirror amendments are subject to the rule, and they really are not subject to negotiation or debate in the first conference committee. If there is a second conference committee, then those mirror amendments can be discussed. You can see on line 3 that the House position increased the general funds by $6 million. I recognize I'm rounding. And the Senate position increased by $9.1 million. For those of you who follow along on the fiscal profile, you'll see that's a difference of $3.1 million. That difference can be identified on a few places, but primarily on page 2, line 61 for the total appropriations, and also more discreetly on page 2, line 33. So if your colleagues are interested, well, where do we see that difference in the general funds? That appears again on line 65, as well as line 35. Next, you will see that both sides had contingent appropriations. On the House side, you passed a contingent appropriation for local government backfill on property tax reductions. The Senate had a similar amendment to backfill just special districts. And we've included that on line 4 of this high-level summary. On the House side, that adds $72 million from the general fund. And on the Senate side, that adds $15 million from the general fund. On line 5, you will see that the House made no changes to the budget reserve account. On the Senate side, they removed the JAC position, which reverted $100 million of energy and large project energy matching funds, which were adopted in the 23 and 24 sessions. You'll see that difference on line 5 of the high-level summary. You'll also see on line 6, there's a difference in the LSRA appropriations. The House position is $40 million, whereas the Senate's position is $100 million. That's the difference in the grants for wildfires. You will also see on line 7 the difference in the school foundation program appropriations. The House position added $163,500, and the Senate added $2.2 million. Once again, that difference of $2,038,202 can be identified on the fiscal profile on page 4, line 65. You'll see a total difference there of about $2.3 million. You also have a difference in the Water 1 accounts. The House added $401,000. The Senate did not. So you will see that difference illustrated on page 6 of the fiscal profile, line 31, page 6, line 31 for the water appropriations. Finally, if you add all of those items up, I like a good all-in number appears on page 3, line 63 of the fiscal profile. And that's because all of the actions of the major accounts all funnel into the LSRA. The reason for that is the budget reserve account requires funds from the LSRA in order to balance, as does the school foundation program. So you see the whole impact of all profiled accounts on that line, the difference between 1.307 billion in the House position and 1.142 billion in the Senate's position. And a simple question will be, well, Don, that adds up to 165 million. How do you get that? $100 million for the energy matching, $60 million difference for the wildfire rehabilitation grants, and $5,175,000 in all of the other amendments, general fund and school foundation program. So it's a nice all-in. It doesn't always work out each year this way, but it's a nice one-stop shop for identification of the all-in number. The House also increased 5 FTE through its floor action, whereas the Senate increased 20 FTE. And when you break this down, I think of this as really only 3 large differences between the two houses. They are illustrated on lines 12, 13, and 14 of your high-level summary. Again, just to reiterate, that's the energy matching funds on line 13, the backfill for local government residential property tax reductions on line 14, and the wildfire grant rehabilitation and restoration response on line 12, excuse me. That really sums all of the major differences, and I will turn it over to Catherine to walk you through amendment by amendment on the Senate side.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I recognize that we're on a bit of a time constraint, so I will move through this fairly quickly, but I will answer any questions that you may have. Catherine Camerati, LSO, Budget Fiscal. Rather than this sheet, the summary sheet that you should have, the tabloid size, rather than this sheet being organized by way of action in page order, it is organized categorically as identical, related, and unrelated. So what does that mean? LSO staff has a rigid definition of an identical or mirror amendment, meaning that not just the intent of the amendment, but the punctuation, the verbiage, all of that is absolutely identical. In addition, if an identical amendment passed in the House but did not pass in the Senate, it is no longer an identical amendment, but related, and vice versa. Related amendments are amendments that have similar intent, but may be worded differently or have a different appropriation or allocation amount than the other chamber. Unrelated amendments are amendments that are completely unique to the chamber of origin. Starting at the top of page 1, these are the identical section. S3002, sponsored by Senator Hicks and mirrored by H3004, sponsored by Representative Heiner, on the Department of Administration and Information. This amendment adds a footnote specifying that a portion of this general fund appropriation, so a portion of 21.8 million for the Human Resources Division, may be used for the department to report to the JAC all FTE full-time positions or part-time positions authorized to work from alternate locations and how many days they worked at alternate locations, essentially their teleworking policy. S3003, sponsored by Senator Larson and mirrored by H3007, sponsored by Representative Eklund, reduces special revenue for several divisions within the Department of Agriculture. The Consumer Protection Division, specifically the Animal Damage Management Board, the Weed and Pest Control, Wyoming Beef Council, Wyoming Wheat Marketing Commission, the Dry Bean Commission, and the Leaf Cutter Bee Division by 171,621 special revenue, and adds a footnote to specify that no more than 8,000 rounding special revenue in the aggregate be appropriated for purposes of cost allocation or O300 series for those divisions. As a note, these decreases bring the cost allocation back to budget fiscal year 2023 levels. S2004, sponsored by Senator Hicks and mirrored by H2008, corrected copy, sponsored by Representative Wincher, increases the Cultural Resources Division within the State Parks and Cultural Resources by $35,000 general funds, and adds a footnote specifying that this one-time appropriation is for purposes of a display for the 1893 Yellowstone National Forest Reserve Survey Party Tree inscription. You'll also note that this was amended by the technical correction as 3030A to correct the year from 1883 to 1893.
And members of the committee, on this one, I wanted to pause. We have two there that do require some subjectivity. Our staff conclusion, you can override. You can determine this as not a mirror amendment. In our assessment, it was, because both houses ended in the same place, even though they required a couple of different technical corrections.
Moving on, S 2011, sponsored by Senator Landon and mirrored by H 2019, sponsored by Representative Larson Lloyd, increases the Behavioral Health Division within the Department of Health by $4 million general funds, and adds a footnote specifying that this appropriation is for purposes of services to preschool children with disabilities and will be included in the standard budget, and that would specifically be for Unit 2510 for preschool services. S 2026, sponsored by Senator Doc Statter and mirrored by House 2033, sponsored by Representative Heiner, for Section 323, Large Project Energy Matching Funds. This adds subsections H and J to Section 323, specifying that of the appropriation, 10 million LSRA Legislative Stabilization Reserve Account funds, or S10, are for the design and engineering of a project physically located within Wyoming that burns, combusts, or gasifies Wyoming coal, and that these funds will prioritize novel approaches to the mining and use of coal, rare earth minerals, critical minerals, and uranium. So it's not new funds, it's just specifying for those 10 million of LISRA funds. Moving on to the related section, S 2001, sponsored by Senator Boner and related to House 3001, sponsored by Representative Nicholas, was deleted by S 3001, sponsored by Senator Garou. Essentially, the net action of S 3001 was to change the funding source of $400,000 previously Wyoming Tourism Reserve and Projects Account funds to general funds. So it's just a change in where the funding is coming from for the Office of Homeland Security Division within the Office of the Governor for the purposes of search and rescue operations, and include this appropriation within the standard budget.
House, we have it coming from the cultural, or the, this other fund. It's only in the Senate that it was approved for coming out of the general fund. Is that right?
Mr. Chairman, that would be correct.
And to further elaborate on this, so the purpose of the funds are identical in both sides. You have a difference in the amount and the location. So the Senate's position is 400,000, the House position is 200,000. And then, of course, the Senate's position is general funds. Your position is tourism projects and reserve and projects account.
S 2022, sponsored by Senator Driscoll and related to H 3003, sponsored by Chairman Bear, was deleted by S 3013. The net action of S 3013 was to increase the amount of funding by $38,202 from $163,500 to $201,702 of School Foundation Program funds, or S5 funds. So that amount includes both the salary and the benefits. This also increases the authorized positions by one full-time employee and adds a footnote that the position is for the Wyoming Charter School Authorizing Board, and that this appropriation will be included in the standard budget. Would not change from S 2022 is included an amendment to footnote 16 in the Office of the Governor to specify that funds shall be spent by the Office to Contract Services to support state personnel related to the Wyoming Charter School Authorizing Board. So this was in both amendments, just the amount had changed. Moving on to page 2. S 3030, sponsored by Chairman Salazar, and related to H 3044, corrected copy, sponsored by Chairman Bear. This is our technical correction. It provides a correction to the Department of Administration and Information by adding footnote numbers after full times due to actions on S 2003 corrected copy and S 2004 corrected copy. Corrections to state parks and cultural resources, largely grammatical corrections, but as we noted, the changing of 1883 to 1893 for the survey party inscription. A correction to the Department of Education School Finance specifying that the state superintendent referenced is the state superintendent of public instruction versus a different superintendent, and a correction to the section 300s for the Wyoming State Shooting Complex. That's a grammatical correction.
So if I might on this one, I wouldn't worry about these. In all likelihood, you'll have to delete and further amend both of them, depending on which amendments you pick.
S 3006, sponsored by Senator Jones, and related to H 2012, sponsored by Representative Larson Lloyd, increases the Board of Control Division within the State Engineer's Office by $156,320 general funds, and authorizes one FTE position, and adds a footnote that specifies that of that appropriation, 125.1 thousand will be included in the department's standard budget. It's different from H 2012. H 2012 has 148,000 general funds for the North Platte modeling and 401.3 thousand Water Development 1 account funds for the Colorado River Basin, and it restores the Gov's Rec.
And again, if I could just insert a little bit of background here. So this, the House position is 3 employees. The Senate position is 1 employee. The House position is a total of right at 550,000, and the Senate's position is 156,000.
Mr. Richards, can you explain how the modeling software fits into this?
So the House position was to approve the governor's request and referred to that modeling for example, for the Colorado River Basin and the North Platte as recommended in the governor's rec. The Senate's position did not specify, they said are for registration and processing activities, but they were much more generic. They did not specify a basin, nor did they specify, for litigation or a preparation for modeling of litigation.
Mr. Richards, do both amendments include the financing for the software, the $148,000, I believe it was?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the House position definitely does. I think the Senate position, it would be dependent upon the executive branch's interpretation.
Thank you. Continue, please, Ms. Cameretti. Give me just a moment. Are there any questions so far from the committee? Okay. Any comments, Mr. Hibbard? Okay, please continue, Ms. Cameretti.
S 2008, sponsored by Senator Larson, related to H 3017, sponsored by Representative Haroldson, increases the administration division within the Wildlife Natural Resource Trust Agency by 40 million LSRA Legislative Stabilization Reserve Account funds, or S10, one time, and adds a footnote specifying that this amount shall be continuously appropriated to the Wyoming Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust Account Board to provide grants to Wyoming conservation districts, weed and pest districts, and the Game and Fish Commission for purposes of restoring vegetation and preventing the establishment of invasive terrestrial vegetation on private and state lands destroyed by wildfires. This amendment was amended by S 3020, sponsored by Senator Crago, which I'm going to discuss these together. It increases the appropriation by 60 million LISRA funds to 100 million and deletes Section 346, the natural disaster mitigation loans, rather than the original amendment, which decreased the natural disaster mitigation loans from 100 million to 60 million. We kind of nicknamed this the 40-60 amendment.
I think that's a great name for that.
And-
Mr. Richards, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, this is the second. I said there would be two where staff inserted some subjectivity. I think you could say with a straight face, Don, Senate 2008 looks identical to House 3017, and you would be right. They both provided for $40 million of grants. However, we look at the end position after all of the amendments are completed, and the Senate's position amends that 40. If it was a separate amendment that didn't amend the 40, we could, argue that yes, it was identical, but it goes into that amendment and it no longer keeps the 40, replaces it with 100 million total. So that's why we believe, in our opinion, it is related. Of course, you could direct us to count them as mirror, and we would do so.
Mr. Richards, the distribution of the 40 or the 100, depending on Senate or House, is consistent, though.
Mr. Chairman, yes.
Thank you. Ms. Camerati, please.
Mr. Chairman, S 2010, sponsored by Senator Driscoll, related to H 3019, sponsored by Representative Larson Lloyd, increases the healthcare financing division within the Department of Health by $833,153 general funds and a like amount of federal funds, and adds a footnote specifying that these appropriations are for the behavioral health rate rebasing and shall be biennialized in the standard budget. And this restores the governor's rec. It's different than the House's position, as it includes a footnote, where I believe the House does not have a footnote for this amendment. S 3028, corrected copy, sponsored by Senator Crago, related to House 3034, sponsored by Chairman Bear, is an addition to Section 300, so it creates Section 351 for special district property tax grants. And this is that 15 million of general funds that Mr. Richards was referencing. So 15 million general funds will be appropriated to the Department of Revenue for purposes of payments to special districts, which will be allocated through a grant application and distribution program. Grants awarded under the program shall not exceed an amount equal to the demonstrated reduction of residential property tax assessments directly attributable to legislation exempting or reducing residential property tax assessments in tax year 2025 enacted during the 2025 general session. If this appropriation is insufficient to restore the amount assessed, the department shall make the grant awards on a pro rata basis. No special district shall receive more than one grant for any tax year, and this appropriation is contingent on the passage of several bills. This is House Bill 130, House Bill 169, Senate File 69, just to name a few, or SF 182 without local government property tax compensation. I believe Chairman Bear has a similar amendment that we discussed. It has a larger appropriation of 72 million directed towards the lowest assessed 8 counties, and with some different provisions, but it will also be contingent on the passage of those House bills.
Mr. Richards, I have a couple of questions about the differences here. The first question I have is the Crago amendment is covering 2 years, is that correct? So it'd be 7.5 million per year of a 2-year period?
Mr. Chairman, that is not correct. The Crago amendment is 1 year. The House amendment, yours, is a 2-year.
Okay, thank you.
And if I could just expand on some additional differences.
The way I'd like you to describe it as far as these special districts, I know my amendment covered all special districts statewide. I'd like you to specify those that would be excluded from the Crago amendment, those special districts that would be excluded, if you could.
Excellent point. So both amendments do apply to special districts. The Crago amendment is limited to health-related, so it would not include weed and pest districts, water improvement districts, irrigation districts, cemetery districts, community college districts. I believe that's essentially all of the districts that it would not apply to. In addition, the House had a provision that the districts must impose their maximum board-approved operational mill levy. The Crago Amendment does not have that provision in there.
Any questions about those differences? Okay. All right. Please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, moving on to the unrelated section, S 2003 corrected copy sponsored by Senator Driscoll. This appropriation increases the General Services Division within the Department of Administration and Information by $155,177 general funds and increases the authorized FTE positions by 2 and adds a footnote specifying that the appropriation and 2 positions are for the Facility Operations Unit. Of this amount, 124.1 thousand general funds will be included in the department's standard budget. This restores 2 of the 3 positions recommended by the governor. S 2004 corrected copy sponsored by Senator Driscoll. This appropriation increases the General Services Division again by 236,501 general funds and increases the authorized full-time positions by 2 and adds a footnote specifying that this appropriation and 2 positions are for the Trades Management Unit. Of this appropriation, 218,000 general funds will be included in the department's standard budget, and this restores 2 positions recommended by the governor. S 2006, sponsored by Senator Driscoll, increases the Cultural Resources Division within State Parks and Cultural Resources by 10,000 general funds and adds a footnote that the one-time appropriation is for an exhibit commemorating former Governor Hathaway. S 2009, sponsored by Senator Driscoll, increases the Healthcare Financing Division within the Department of Health by $1,195,135 general funds and a like amount of federal funds, and adds a footnote specifying that these appropriations are for purposes of maternity care rate rebasing and shall be included in the standard budget. This does restore the governor's recommendation. S 2012, sponsored by Senator Driscoll, increases the Behavioral Health and Aging Division by $1,326,167 general funds and increases the authorized full-time employee positions by 14. This action does undo the Joint Appropriations Committee position to remove these funds and positions. S 2016, sponsored by Senator Guru, increases the Wyoming Tourism Board by $488,127 S14 or Wyoming Tourism account, and adds a footnote specifying that this appropriation is for salary adjustments for the Wyoming Office of Tourism. Of this appropriation, 390,502 Wyoming tourism account funds shall be included in the department's standard budget. This restores the governor's recommendation. S 2018, sponsored by Senator Driscoll, increases the state aid for the University of Wyoming by 500,000 general funds and adds a footnote specifying that this one-time appropriation is for purposes of the University of Wyoming Blockchain and Digital Innovation Program, provided that the university develop software as specified for the Secretary of State's office that would allow for initial business entity formation and amendments, notary registration and renewal, apostille and authentication certification requests, lobbyist registration and renewal, and all initial and additional filing types, as well as amendments to be filed online. S 2019, sponsored by Senator Driscoll, increases the Technical Outreach and Research Division within the Enhanced Oil Recovery Commission by 279,401 general funds, and adds a footnote specifying that this appropriation is for the technical outreach and research staffing, and that it be included in the department's standard budget. This amendment restores the governor's recommendation. S 2020, sponsored by Senator Guru, increases the administration division within the Wyoming retirement system by 93,233 pension funds and adds a footnote specifying that this appropriation is for purposes of the advancement of one analyst to senior analyst and one senior analyst to investment officer. This appropriation shall be included in the department's standard budget, and this restores the governor's recommendation. S 2021, sponsored by Senator Driscoll, increases the School Foundation Program Division within the Department of Education School Finance by 2 million school foundation program funds, and adds a footnote specifying that this appropriation is for purposes of the State Superintendent of Public Instruction to establish a process to reimburse school districts for allowable special education and transportation expenditures by a charter school within the same year. In no event shall any school district receive duplicative reimbursement. S 3029, sponsored by Senator Salazar. This is our budget balancer, so the Senate needed to increase the transfer from the Legislative Stabilization Reserve Account, or the LISRA, to the general fund by $145 million, for a total of $215 million. S 2025, sponsored by Senator Dockstader, amended Section 321 and 323, specifying that no funds from the appropriation would be expended for carbon storage or sequestration projects, and deleted all new language requiring that a total of $100 million would revert to the budget reserve account. This amendment was deleted by S 3015, sponsored by Senator Rothfuss, to which the net action just simply removed the provision that no funds from the appropriation would be expended for the carbon storage or sequestration projects. It didn't change the deletion of all new language requiring that a total of $100 million would revert to the budget reserve account. And with that, I am happy to stand for questions.
Any questions? Ms. Camerati. Representative Sherwood.
Thank you. Just for clarification, could we go back to the Crago amendment? So it's on page 2. It was amendment number 28 on third reading. Looking at the amendment in its entirety, I just want to make sure we're all clear that the special districts that are called out in the Crago amendment are senior citizen service districts, any hospital district, and then special fire districts, fire protection district, really any fire district. If I have misspoken, could I get clarification? Thank you.
Ms. Camerati or Mr. Richards?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I concur. In my rendition, I was speaking to the special districts that were not included.
Which was my request. Okay. Good. All right. Thank you. Is there any other items to cover?
Mr. Chairman, it might be perfunctory, but you are required to create a report. We have done so on your behalf. You could just merely sign it as your office of chairman of the committee, or you could call for a voice or roll call vote if you wish.
Okay, let's go ahead and take a roll call vote on the report. Any questions on this vote? And Mr. Richards, will you or Ms. Childress be taking that roll call vote? I guess it'll be Ms. Childress since it's a house
Yes.
action.
And just to be clear for the committee, this is just a one-page report. It is a listing of all of the amendments. The summary is just a staff background. It is just your recognition that indeed the Senate did pass those amendments, and you're providing that as an informational purpose only to the floor.
Any questions? Seeing none, Ms. Childress, will you please take the roll?
Roll call vote on the standing committee report. Representative Alleman? Aye. Representative Angelos? Aye. Representative Haroldson?
Aye.
Representative Pendergraft?
Aye.
Representative Sherwood? Aye. Representative Smith?
Aye.
Chairman Bear?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, 7 aye.
7 ayes. Ms. Scott, I will sign a copy for you as well. Okay. Any other actions, Mr. Richards?
Mr. Chairman, I think Ms. Scott also has a request, if you wanted to share some of the high-level summary or the summary sheet with the members of the floor to get your signature, and we will have that available for distribution at the appropriate time whenever you select that.
Very good. We'll get that accomplished then. Okay, with that, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for being here. House of Propes, I'd like to just have a private chat with you all for just a moment before we go back down.